It starts with a silent line of men in worn overcoats, boots crunching over frost and dead leaves as they vanish between the dark pines. And not a single one ever walks back out. This is the moment a quiet stretch of Soviet woods became a hidden execution site in World War II. So cold and methodical, it still chills historians today. And what set it all in motion is far darker than anyone expects. April 1940. Picture this. A line of exhausted Polish officers, priests, professors, and civil servants, men who once led classrooms, courtrooms, parishes, now shuffling forward with their hands tied, blindfolds pressed against their faces. They'd been told they were being relocated, maybe transferred to another camp, perhaps even released. But the truth was waiting for them inside the thick, silent forests of Katyń, Kalinin, and Kharkiv, where the trees hid more than just shadows. The Soviet Union's secret police, known as the NKVD, had prepared everything. Trucks idling under the pines, pits dug so deep the earth looked freshly wounded, guards who didn't speak a single unnecessary word. One by one, each man was pulled from the line, marched toward a small, dim clearing, and executed with a single bullet to the back of the head. No trial, no final words, just the echo of a gunshot swallowed by the forest. In the end, over 22,000 Polish citizens vanished into those mass graves. What would you have done if you were among them? On August 23, 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union, two powers that openly hated each other, sat down and signed a non-aggression pact. To the outside world, it looked like a simple, let's not fight each other agreement. But buried inside was the real bombshell, a secret protocol slicing Eastern Europe like a map on a bargaining table. And right in the middle of that line was Poland. Germany would take the West. The USSR would take the East. Poland never stood a chance. Its fate wasn't decided on a battlefield, but in a quiet room where Stalin and Hitler carved up a nation before the first shot was even fired.
40,000 Polish prisoners of war were in the hands of the Red Army. Of this number, 125,000 were passed on to the NKVD to labor and concentration camps, while some were released. They were soldiers whose homeland were lands occupied by the USSR, that is the territories of Western Belarus and Western Ukraine. The number of released is 4.
And this is where everything spirals out of control. At dawn on September 1st, 1939, Germany tore into Poland with a level of speed and firepower the world had never seen. Cities collapse under the blitzkrieg, soldiers fight back hard, civilians scramble for safety, but the front lines buckle fast. And just when Poland tries to hold its ground, the second punch lands. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded from the east, claiming they're protecting the locals. After the so-called collapse of the Polish state, in reality, Stalin is cashing in on his deal with Hitler. Marshal Edward Rides-Schmigwy orders what he can: evacuate to Hungary, escape if possible. But confusion spreads faster than the troops can move. By early October, the fight is over. Poland is swallowed whole. Germany on one side, USSR on the other. The Polish state disappears, replaced by fear, occupation, and a silence that would soon hide a massacre. And here's where the nightmare tightens its grip. After the invasion, between 240,000 and 250,000 Poles fell into Soviet hands. Soldiers, teachers, policemen, even civilians swept up in the chaos. Among them are roughly 10,000 officers, the backbone of Poland's military and society. But instead of being treated like prisoners of war, they're handed straight to the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. And once that happens, the rules disappear. They're labeled enemies of the state, nothing more. The NKVD ships them to the main camps, Kozelsk, Starobelsk, and Ostashkov, places that look like barracks but feel like traps. Overcrowded rooms, insufficient food and water, interrogations at all hours, and informers planted inside to report every whisper. Every prisoner is questioned about loyalty, politics, family ties, anything the Soviets think could justify keeping them alive or not. And most of these men had no idea the decisions that determined their fate had already begun. And this is the moment the horror becomes official. By late 1939, NKVD officers started reviewing thousands of prisoner files, looking for any reason to label these men dangerous. But the truth, the verdict was already written. In March 1940, Lavrentiy Beria, Stalin's feared NKVD chief, sent a secret memo recommending the ultimate solution: execute them all. His wording is ice cold. He calls the prisoners hardened, unrepentant enemies of Soviet authority. Stalin agrees immediately. The Politburo signs the order: Stalin, Molotov, Voroshilov, Mikoyan, Kalinin, Kaganovich. Each signature seals thousands of death sentences in one go. And the victims weren't random soldiers. They were professors, engineers, priests, doctors, lawyers, judges, activists, landowners, poets, the people who shaped Poland's culture, leadership, and identity. In one decision, the Soviet Union set out to wipe out an entire nation's future by killing its brightest minds. And now, the machinery of death starts moving. To make the executions run fast and silent, the NKVD assigns a special troika, a three-man committee with absolute authority. Their names: Vsevolod Merkulov, Bogdan Kobalov, and Leonid Bashtakov. These men don't pull the triggers themselves, but they design everything. They create the death list, review the files, sign off on execution batches, and coordinate the logistics across multiple camps and burial sites. Every name they approve becomes another body destined for a forest pit. Their job is simple and terrifying: make mass murder run like a smooth, efficient system. And under their direction, it does. April 1940 marked the beginning of one of the darkest operations in Soviet history. Orders went out to every NKVD camp and prison holding Polish prisoners across Belarus and Ukraine. The instructions were clear, secret, and final. Prisoners were told they were being transferred, questioned further, or even released. Anything to prevent resistance or panic. They moved them in small groups, always after dark, always surrounded by guards. The execution sites were set up with soundproof rooms so that nobody outside would hear a thing. No screams, no gunshots. Each person got checked off a list, identified, handcuffed, and then led into the chamber. They had to kneel or stand with their backs turned, and then just one shot to the back of the head. Minutes later, the body was dragged out, and the next man was brought in. This continued until dawn. If you mention the Katyń executions, one NKVD officer stands out above all the others: Vasily Blokhin. Major Dmitry Tokarev remembered seeing him night after night, Blokhin in his dark leather cap, heavy apron, and long gloves. He didn't look like a soldier, he looked like a butcher, and honestly, that's what he was. He took the job with terrifying precision. He set himself a target: 300 executions every night. He even chose a German Walter pistol, thinking that if anyone came asking questions, they'd blame Germany instead of the Soviets. The routine was brutal and methodical. Victims came in one by one, hands tied, heads pushed down. Blokhin pressed the gun to the base of the skull and fired quick, efficient, no hesitation. The bodies were hauled out right away, loaded onto trucks, and dumped in burial trenches near Mednoy, which workers dug every single night. Over 28 nights, Blokhin executed an estimated 7,000 Polish prisoners himself, making him the most prolific executioner in history. Early on June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. They invaded the Soviet Union and swept across huge stretches of land, including the Katyń region. Fast forward to early 1943, German troops stumbled on strange mounds in the Katyń forest. They started digging, and what they uncovered shocked everyone. Mass graves, thousands of Polish officers still in uniform, hands tied, each killed with a single shot to the back of the head. The Germans saw an opportunity and wasted no time. They brought in journalists, forensic experts, and foreign delegates to show off the graves. Documents and personal belongings pulled from the bodies made one thing clear: the victims died in the spring of 1940. back when the Soviets, not the Germans, controlled the area. The Polish government in exile demands the Red Cross investigate. The Soviets flew into a rage and immediately cut off diplomatic ties with Poland. Moscow fired back, accusing Berlin of staging the massacre and pushing their version in papers like Pravda. Even at the Nuremberg trials, the Soviets insisted the Germans did it, but that story fell apart under closer examination. For 50 years, the Soviet Union flat out denied any involvement in Katyń. They dismissed every shred of evidence as fascist lies. Archives stayed locked. Witnesses kept quiet. Researchers lived in fear. Generation after generation grew up hearing nothing but the official Soviet story. Katyń became one of the USSR's most closely guarded secrets, buried beneath propaganda and terror. Things changed after Stalin's death. The Soviet leadership shifted, and some of the men behind Katyń finally faced justice, or something close to it. Lavrentiy Beria, the infamous NKVD chief who led the executions, was arrested by the new regime and executed in December 1953. His top aides, Vsevolod Merkulov and Bogdan Kobalov, were also executed that year. Still, justice only went so far. Vasily Blokhin, the NKVD's chief executioner, the man who personally shot thousands, retired with honors and lived well for a while. Later, during Khrushchev's de-Stalinization, Blokhin was stripped of his rank and decorations. He ended up disgraced, broken, and drinking himself to death. He died in 1955, officially a suicide. Most others involved in the massacre disappeared into the shadows. Their names stayed hidden in classified files, their roles covered up or erased for decades. Nobody knew the full list of those responsible. By 1990, the lies couldn't hold up anymore. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev finally admitted that the NKVD, not the Nazis, had carried out the Katyń massacre. This broke decades of silence and propaganda. Then, 2 years later, Russian President Boris Yeltsin took it further. He released original Politburo documents, execution orders, death lists, and internal correspondence, all signed by Stalin and his top men. The world finally saw the undeniable proof. After 50 years, the truth about Katyń finally came out. The Katyń massacre was only one chapter in Poland's wartime suffering. During World War II, 6 million Polish citizens, Jews, soldiers, civilians, and resistance fighters were killed under both Nazi and Soviet occupation. Entire communities were erased. In this vast national tragedy, Katyń became a powerful symbol of the struggle for historical truth. It represented not just the murder of Poland's elite, but a decades-long battle against lies, censorship, and political manipulation. The memory of Katyń reminds us that no crime stays buried forever. Truth cuts through lies, even when powerful nations try to silence it. If this story moved you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so more people understand the history that was almost erased.